In this election, you can't reward the political hacks in the Liberal Party who've departed so far, they've gone so far to the left. You can't reward that. And simply saying, well, they're better than Labor, that doesn't cut the mustard. There will be no change. So I think you put forward a compelling argument for, at least in this election, people to look at the alternatives. Yeah. I think that's really, really important because they're not worthy. They're not worthy of our support in the current time because they haven't stood up on so many issues. I mean, we've been talking business. They haven't stood up on freedom.
100%.
You go to their website again, that statement of principles. It's laughable the way that they have all allowed these terrible draconian COVID restrictions to be waved through.
But the fate of sitting members depends on electors in the cities and those who come many miles and by varied forms of transport to vote in outlying booths in country towns. Still, in New South Wales, they can quench their thirst as hotels are open for the first time on election day.
Okay, so let's talk about the Liberal Party first. You're very familiar with the Liberal Party. It's the case that lots and lots and lots of right-wing voters would find it hard to think of voting for anybody other than the Liberal Party. That anybody other than the party right of centre with the best chance of forming government deserves a vote at all. So for the rusted on Liberal voter who's not necessarily party loyal but just has, they're a sophisticated business owner who really believes the only way to benefit their business is to have anybody but Labor in government and therefore can't risk voting for anybody other than the Liberal Party. What do you say to those people? For a start, where are they right about the Liberal Party? What is the thing that makes the Liberal Party a deserving home for a vote? And then what are the problems with that thinking?
Well, the Liberal Party, in terms of its statement of values, are right on the money, no pun intended, for people in small business, for private enterprise, because they are about, or meant to be about, protecting the interests of those who wish to be self-reliant, carve their own way in the world, take risks, set up a business, employ people, and actually look after their own, financial welfare, if I can put it like that. Mm-hmm. People who actually want to, build something. So that's what they're about in terms of their statement of values. My criticism, after being a member for many years, is that they're not being true to those values, and the Labor Party clearly don't get it on that front. And we'll come to them, I assume, in a moment. But I think over the last probably 6 or 7 years, the Coalition have done many things to make life more difficult for small business, medium-sized businesses. They have put in place policies that can easily be dealt with by the top end of town, big corporates, but don't sit well in small business. And I can point to a range of things to do with stuff the ATO has imposed on small business, the requirements to use software systems that now you just have to do that. The requirement to have company ID numbers, director ID numbers. There are many, just it's death by 1,000 cuts. Just more and more bureaucracy, red tape, more empowerment of the federal bureaucracy, and its ability to lord it over small business. I mean, I'm in the financial services sector, so I declare a conflict of interest to the degree that I'm in the sector. But I'm now going to talk about financial advice. Thanks to this coalition government, people who are the less well off in the community now cannot get affordable financial advice, and that's as a result of the Banking Royal Commission, which was set up to try and actually go after the banks and their practices or bad practices. Instead, what's happened is financial advisors and brokers have been the ones who got it in the neck. And that's just another example. You should be able to get affordable financial advice. People who are less well off, of limited financial means, are the ones who need advice. They simply can't afford it anymore because of the changes that have been made. And many financial advisors thousands of them actually have left the financial services sector. So those are just some examples of where I think this government has really lost its way, and that's the Liberal Party.
Is there a way of, let me just say this as a statement because I won't disguise it as a question. I think the best way to help the Liberal Party is to not be a rusted-on supporter of the Liberal Party, and to actually be a noisy consumer of the Liberal Party. So as a supporter, like as a business owner, as a father and husband, as a citizen and patriot, I want the Liberal Party to be the best they can be. I think they're the party with the best chance of forming government on the right wing, and I want them to be the best possible that they possibly can be. And I think part of the solution to helping them do that is to not just think about the next election, but to think about the next 5 elections, and to essentially teach them a lesson now that they can't take me, my values, my family, my business for granted, or my support or my donations. And therefore they will lose that support when they don't earn it, when they don't perform to a standard. And so I actually feel like it's the most helpful thing to do to cut them off, like a recalcitrant adolescent who's just abusing mum and dad's generosity. It's like, you're cut off, grow up, take some responsibility for yourself, and come back and see us, because we'll love you for a long time.
I think it's a very powerful idea, David. And I guess I almost agree, but I sort of can't, because I'm now with the Liberal Democrats, and frankly I'm over the Liberal Party and the Liberal National Party. I want the Liberal Democrats to be the party who now champion the appropriate values on the right of politics, particularly about small government and support for private enterprise. So, make no mistake, they're my political enemy, so I declare that. But in terms of, for people who perhaps don't want to support the Liberal Democrats always, I mean, that would be part of my pitch though as well, that in this election you can't reward the political hacks in the Liberal Party who've departed so far, they've gone so far to the left. You can't reward that, and simply saying, well, they're better than Labor, that doesn't cut the mustard. There will be no change. So I think you put forward a compelling argument for, at least in this election, people to look at the alternatives. I think that's really, really important, because they're not worthy. They're not worthy of our support in the current time, because they haven't stood up on so many issues. I mean, we've been talking business. They haven't stood up on freedom.
100%.
You go to their website again, that statement of principles. It's laughable the way that they have all allowed these terrible draconian COVID restrictions to be waved through, and also then things to do with electronic surveillance of Australians and proposed digital identity legislation, and ACMA censoring fake news. It's
misinformation.
Misinformation, and who defines that?
Yeah.
So there are many, many problems there.
The chief source of it, as it turns out, Facebook and big parties. Let's talk about, so with your political commentary hat on, let's talk about the National Party as a brand. Do you see any distinctions from them as a member of the coalition? If somebody's possibly choosing a National Party member versus a Liberal Party member, do their statement of values, their policies, their runs on the board actually inspire any more confidence?
Well, I think that the National Party have tended to stand up more for their traditional base over the last few years. They could have done a lot more. They should have done a lot more. But to try and be fair about this, they have made their points known. They have taken stands on issues where the Liberal Party room haven't been prepared to do that. So I give the National Party brownie points for that. Although if we're looking nationally, we're talking nationally.
Absolutely.
In New South Wales, I scratch my head at where the New South Wales Nats have gone. I think they're a very strange beast these days. I mean, some of the stuff they've supported in the state parliament, quite left-wing legislation on social issues. I just don't understand how the rank and file of the Nats would would get behind that, they must be really wondering as well. And it was interesting, in recent times I've had occasion to have some detailed conversations with Bob Catter, and Bob makes a number of important points about the way that we've not got the best outcome on international trade agreements. I mean, a lot of people dismiss Bob because he's colourful and he's out there, but at the heart of it, he makes really important points on things that the National Party should have done a better job in standing up on, to do with, obviously, with agriculture.
Yep. What was the claim that Pauline Hanson made about Lib Dem immigration policy, and what's the truth of the record?
Well, Pauline Hanson made a claim that somehow we believed in some free-for-all in terms of immigration, and that's not the case. We believe in a larger Australia. We believe in the benefits of immigration. Personally, having been a mayor and a premier, I think we need to ensure that we bring in skilled people and indeed unskilled people in some occasions. And we also, though, have to do that in a way that is planned. So far too much of the immigration picture has been people coming to the major cities and then huge demands on infrastructure and services, which has caused significant pain and growing pressures. And that's because it's just been a bit of a free-for-all. And what happens is the federal government lets people in the door, and then the state governments and local governments have to pick up the pieces without necessarily the right funding. We do, though, need to have an immigration program. And one thing I'm bemused, though, to this extent about Hanson's comments, because if she was out listening to people in Queensland across the state, as I have been, and she's clearly out there, but if she's listening to them, she would know from employers they cannot get people at the moment. So on the tours I've been on, Western Queensland, southwestern Queensland, along the coastal cities, every employer is saying we cannot get both skilled and unskilled people. There are positions vacant. We just cannot fill. Essentially, that many of these towns have, full employment, and that is causing economic pain now. So, does Pauline Hanson want to shut the border? I mean, the reason, by the way, we've got low unemployment is not due to the genius of Scott Morrison or Josh Frydenberg. It's because for 2 years of COVID, the border was shut, and probably 360 to 380,000 people didn't come to Australia. And now we have a real problem, and it will hold us back economically.
So there's a level of unemployment which is good because it indicates employers can find staff. If we have a zero unemployment, that means there's not enough people out there looking for a job to fill the skilled positions that are vacant. Is there some truth in that?
Well, I guess at the moment they're getting to a level of unemployment which is historically as low as it's been for sort of 50 years, and it's unclear as to whether how you actually get those other people who are still in the unemployment queues to work. It might be that there's some people who don't want to work, who are more inclined to be on welfare. But simply what I'm saying is the facts right now are that we need immigration to fill important jobs in the economy, across the economy, whether it be in agriculture or mining, service industries, right across the board. People are crying out in business to get these employees, and they cannot get them.
Right.
And so I don't understand why Pauline Hanson would even sort of throw that sort of criticism at the Lib Dems at the moment in the middle of this campaign, because that's the situation on the ground.
So,
it will hold the country back. So we believe in immigration. We believe in a planned, structured, appropriate immigration program, and particularly I believe in using immigration to build up our regional cities and towns.
I don't think either Lib Dems or One Nation believe in either closed borders or open borders. And so the squabble's probably degrees of difference in the middle. prior to COVID and this experience with closed borders and people not able to come here, etc., do you think the immigration balance was about right, a little bit too much, or
I think it was too high, probably.
too high in gross numbers and not targeted?
Yeah, too high in gross numbers and not targeted in terms of where the people were meant to be settled. And it put huge infrastructure demands on our major cities, particularly Sydney, Melbourne, and to a fair extent Brisbane. That's a fact. We've had very high levels of immigration, and it means that that local government has to build roads and libraries and parks and all the community infrastructure, and similarly the state government highway network and public transport systems can be at well behind the eight ball in dealing with these new communities. I mean, we've had high levels of immigration in recent years, and it's sort of it might have actually seen economic growth, but the argument is per capita growth has actually not performed well.
Yeah. So far from an open slather kind of approach to immigration, throw the doors open and come you weary and burdened and so forth, invitation, you're actually wanting a more sensible approach to immigration that helps employment and doesn't pressure infrastructure nationally.
Yeah, exactly. And look, government does have important roles. I mean, the Liberal Democrats want less government, but government should stick to the things that it should be doing.
Exactly.
Okay, so government doesn't need to try and pick winners in business and the sectors of the economy. Government does have an important planning role, and it should be dealing with that.
Yeah.
But again, I've really got to make this point. I don't understand why Pauline Hanson, in the context of this current debate, current election and the debate, would be raising immigration when there is a definite need right now to bring people in. That's unequivocal.
Yeah. Well, she may have misunderstood what your policy was, but we can wait for further clarification from her. Let's talk about One Nation as a right-of-centre option. Arguably the right-wing minor party that's been around the longest, most established. Certainly Senator Hanson's brand is well out there. Mark Latham's providing a fresh face and appeal to the brand in New South Wales. He's obviously not contesting the federal election. George Christensen now in their ranks. What do you think are the pros and cons for a voter right of centre who's looking for a better hope for the future of Australia than the coalition? One Nation as an alternative. What are their strengths and weaknesses policy-wise?
Oh, look, I think with One Nation, what they're offering is on certain key issues or lightning rod issues that people know where they stand. So on things like immigration, things like the rights of men in terms of family law and breakups like that. I think they're very clear in their views. It's been a bit different also though with Mark Latham, who you mentioned before, because he has brought I think a broader perspective to the whole thing, and he particularly I think of him as taking a stand at left-wing woke ideology, and that's fantastic. So that's there. I don't think though, from what I've seen, there's a broad policy agenda that they've actually bothered to publish. Now, I could be wrong, but I certainly haven't seen them promoting it. So I think that's, to me, that's the shortcoming.
But as objectively as you can, what are One Nation really great at that deserve a support?
I think prosecuting sort of issues that resonate with a slice of our community, and they are often important issues. They have been. Sometimes I haven't agreed with them. I think, for example, Pauline Hanson standing up for men vis-a-vis the family law situation and how they're treated through that process. I think that's been important.
Yep.
It needed that balance because
You're right.
It's like that the assumption that men are always the baddies in a breakup. And the women are the ones that need to be protected. Well, I don't think that's fair or reasonable.
Yep.
We need balance in our debate. So I think that was a good one. And there's other things that she's championed as well that are important.
And what would you advise a right of centre voter who values freedom, who values small government, how would you caution them that perhaps there are some things about One Nation that might not align with everything a right of centre voter is looking for?
Well, one of the other things I should applaud as well, though, about One Nation was that at least Senator Hanson took a stand on vaccine coercion, vaccine mandates, and attempted to introduce legislation.
Would you have done the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was the right thing to do. And, again, shame on, the Coalition and the PM for not supporting that. So that was really important.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the cautionary note, though, on One Nation, what bothers me on occasions is the overreach. And, for example, if we go back in the last few years, I've been concerned about Islamic extremism within Australia, and that needed to be dealt with, and we need to be firm about that. And I think we could continue to be firm about what constitutes the real values of this country, but then the language often that's being used by One Nation and and one of the stunts that comes to mind, wearing certain outfit into the Parliament. I mean, really, I just that's not the way I want to see our politics conducted. Now, just to probably to fight her corner for a second though, it's hard for a minor party clearly to be noticed, and sometimes you have to do something a bit over the top to be noticed, to make the point, and that's an indictment on the media. But I wish we didn't have to see things like that. I would like to see
So
debate.
we won't be seeing Campbell Newman in a burqa anytime soon?
I don't think so, no. But what I would like to see in this country is the important issues are able to be discussed and discussed respectfully. And across the board now, the sort of the abuse and the nastiness and the immediate leap to actually characterise someone who you don't agree with as being a bad person, that's anathema to me.
Yeah, it's not been fair criticism of Pauline. It's not at all.
Well, look, I've found her to be reasonable to deal with. We've always been able to have a good conversation. I've probably only known her for about 6 or 7 years directly, but she's always been good and positive to deal with as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Let's talk about the Liberal Democrats. Why, when you gave up hope of the Liberal Party, the LNP coalition being redeemable, when you said that's a futile investment of efforts for a better Australia, why was Liberal Democrats the party you thought were the most credible alternative?
Well, I guess it's the philosophy, because I probably had never crystallised my thoughts in this way, but I think I'm actually libertarian, and it's very much, in a nutshell, I don't want the government in my life. I don't like government, I don't like bureaucracy, I don't like red tape, I don't like being bossed around by other people. And, in Australia today, we have a lot of bureaucrats and a lot of people wearing, police uniforms or Australian Border Force uniforms, etc., who want to tell you what to do. And they've been given laws by politicians to do just that. So that's a big it's the philosophy.
For those people who are listening who are also libertarian and have never crystallised their thoughts and don't know what that is, let's define the terms, because there might be some different interpretations of what being libertarian means. So to you, what is a libertarian, and what would somebody listening or watching identify with if they were closer to libertarian than most other philosophies?
Well, libertarians essentially believe that we should be free to live our lives in the way that we choose, as long as we don't impact on those around us in an adverse way. And so we're for small government, we're for individual responsibility, balanced budgets, low debt, low taxes. We want people to be able to get on and live their lives without interference, and that's very much has resonance with me. So when it comes to the sort of the the government or fiscal side of the house, it's the things I've just said. When it comes to perhaps some of those social issues, it's, well, I don't have a problem if someone has a different lifestyle to me, as long as they don't impact on myself or the broader community in an adverse way.
With libertarianism, what would you think is the main difference between that and conservatism?
Well, I think it's on the social side of the house, to be upfront about it, and it's, conservatives adopt on a range of specific issues approaches that libertarians wouldn't agree with. So, for example, as I've said publicly in the past, the issue about the way we deal with drugs and the whole war on drugs, I think, is a big difference between the libertarians and conservatives. So, my view, having been in government, remember, is that the war on drugs is lost. It's a nonsense. Drugs have never been more plentiful, available and cheap.
Potent.
And yet we continue to pretend that somehow through law enforcement and prohibition that we can stop this scourge. We can't. And it is the same, we're going down the same road as what happened in the United States with prohibition in the 20s, and it didn't work then.
What about the argument?
We could talk for a long time about that. But can I give you another aspect of this as well? So in Australia today, for example, the TGA has gone out on a bit of a jihad and a few years ago and banned Panadeine over the counter. Now, Panadeine is a codeine-based painkiller that, for most of my adult life, someone who gets a migraine occasionally found very effective in dealing with that pain relief. Now, it's a prescription-only item. Now, this was because they claimed in the TGA there were people out there who had codeine dependency. So, the many have been hurt because of the actions of a few, and other mechanisms could have put in place to try and deal with people who are stocking up on Panadeine. Those are the sorts of things that's crazy stuff. Meantime, we could go around the corner in this part of the world and probably buy some drugs very quickly.
Yep, we're in a very rough part of the world.
Well, I didn't say that. You said
that. I want to direct the conversation, and I do want to be efficient and not get bogged down on any one issue, but to tease out the heart of these issues with legalising marijuana or the war on drugs more broadly. One of the, I think, good arguments that conservatives offer is that some people have no other moral compass other than the law. And so leaving those recreational behaviours in the criminal code is a good signal to send to those people who have no other moral compass. Do you agree on that point? And if so, is there a way to not waste billions of dollars of taxpayer money and at the same time not signal to the wider community that as long as they're only harming themselves, they can go ahead?
Well, look, there's just so much in this. I can't answer that directly very quickly. Let me give you an example of San Francisco, and I visited with my wife about 3 or 4 years ago. We were horrified to see open smoking of marijuana on the streets, and indeed there were parts of San Francisco's central business area which were quite scary in the middle of the day. Now, that's where people have said, well, we're going to legalise this or turn a blind eye to it. But they've then actually thrown everything out. Just because you legalise the substance doesn't mean you then approve unacceptable behaviour. We don't walk down the street with a bottle of scotch sculling from it, nor should people be walking around in the middle of the day smoking dope and doing drug deals on the streets. So we've got to be very clear about what we're talking about here. We're talking about having an enlightened view on the use of those drugs, but we actually have to have clear laws and social norms about how it impacts on people. So I go back to what I said before about not impacting adversely on people, well, that's an example of, where people have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. They actually have created a situation where they've said there's a free-for-all, and I'm not advocating that. But what I'm saying is just the facts that those who want to take drugs in our society right now are. They are, and we pretend otherwise, but we're not. We often tend to go to stereotypes as well. The sort of the tattooed, young person, from Struggle Street who's sort of taking ice, or the heroin junkie or whatever. Whereas if we're actually honest about this, there are the people who are in professional careers, who are in their 50s, who their whole adult life, on weekends they've indulged in marijuana, or there's there are many young up and coming businesswomen in social circles in this city who are well and truly into the cocaine. So that's happening, and it's happening when it's illegal. And this is what happened with prohibition in the US, in that the law made, by definition, over 45% of Americans lawbreakers as criminals, because they were all drinking alcohol. It was easier to get a drink in prohibition it was easier to get a drink in New York during prohibition than it was when it was repealed, because once you legalised alcohol, taxed it, regulated it, controlled it, had responsible service of alcohol, licensing laws, etc., it was all controlled again. So that's the flip side to what you put to me. There's a heck of a lot in this. And if anybody who ever wants to really look at this and see what I'm saying should go and watch. There's a very good series that was done on prohibition, a 3-part documentary that's out there by the guy who made the American Civil War documentary many years ago, which was very, very well recognised and applauded. But fascinating story, prohibition, and great parallels with what we're seeing today. My final point is this: prohibition doesn't work. Just doesn't work.
On that point, I agree with you. And I think the solution is nuanced and complicated and requires a lot of testing and measuring. We need to, not recklessly, but experiment and see what policies have a desired outcome and what policies are futile.
And can I, by the way, make this important point? As a Premier of this state, Queensland, I took a huge, aggressive law enforcement stance that actually kicked criminal motorcycle gangs who were the manufacturers and distributors of drugs, mainly ice, in Queensland. And what happened? Crime went down 15 to 20%. What's happened today? They're back. They're out there.
And crime is proliferating in this
Exactly,
state.
exactly. So
petty crimes.
So yeah, exactly. So that's why the crime rates went down.
Yeah.
When we jumped.
Let's
on that.
talk about that. That's probably your most.
So I say to people going, Newman's lost the plot here. Well, hang on. I gave it a red hot go. What did the rest of you do?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you all do?
Yeah.
Just like where is your if you're so much into we want to deal with drugs.
Yeah.
Well show me the community resolve.
It's a worthwhile point to differentiate between libertarian and libertine. Libertine is anything goes, if it feels good, do it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And libertarians are just anyway. On the issue you've raised, it's probably your hottest button, biggest generator of hate and conservatives, right-wing people who go, Campbell Newman, is the Vlad laws.
Not conservatives. That's where it comes from. Libertarians.
Well, there's a heck of a lot of people who are like libertarian. Maybe libertarians are like that. That was big government. That was oppressive, ruthless, and vindictive. There was, two old grannies associating and going to a pub together, and three mates having a beer together and going to jail. So I don't know. I guess let's talk in 2 minutes, no more. Regrets and pride
Well,
points in that?
Well, firstly, there was a riot on the Gold Coast on a Saturday night in a public place, scaring women and children and mums and dads. And the people who perpetrated that took on the police, then went to a police station and essentially laid siege to it and demanded that people, their fellow their fellow comrades would be released. So a tough stand had to be taken, and indeed, left-wing commentators urged me and the government to take strong action. The laws were developed by one Walter Sofronoff, who was then the Solicitor General, is now the President of the Court of Appeal, and I don't think he's a right-winger either. And he wasn't asked to develop them. He actually, of his own volition, came up with these laws and came to the then Attorney General, Jarrod Bleij, and said, this is the solution, this is how you deal with this. So I make those important points about why and how. As to my reflections on that, I frankly think they were unnecessary. And the last 2 years, and the last 2 years of COVID have also, probably heightened my awareness of the perils of giving bureaucrats and police too much power, because they were misused and they annoyed a lot of people who just wanted to go and ride their motorbikes on a Saturday afternoon. So
that's a big walk back for you.
Well, no, I've said it before, and quite a few times actually in the last 12 months.
And for anybody that's watching, for everybody that's watching, of course, nobody else is going to be hearing it. I think we need politicians who are capable of learning and not pretending like they've never made a mistake, and going, you know what, I've evolved in my thinking, and I was adamant at the time, and I was also wrong at the time, and I wouldn't do it the same again. So if you're capable of that, then that's brownie points to me.
Well, I am saying that I don't think the laws were necessary. So just to cap that off, what we should have done is simply insisted that the police do their job using the existing laws. Plenty of laws on the statute books. Frankly, the police are scared of the criminal motorcycle gangs. They're scared of them, and they're back in business in Queensland today, and it's because the police won't actually use the laws effectively and go after them in a comprehensive and consistent way.
Interesting.
And so
it's not the Labor Party's fault.
Well, it is the Labor Party's fault because they're the government.
But if the laws were already in place, changing the laws isn't.
The laws. What I'm saying to you is, you've made the point to me about the criticisms of the laws. I'm saying I agree that the criticisms are probably valid, given what we've seen about overreach, given what we've seen in Victoria, where the police have acted just terribly.
And you didn't hear that at the time? This is predictably going to be abused sometime in the future?
It was criticised at the time, but the position that was served up was, to me as Premiers, was you need these laws to deal with this situation. Okay, and I just don't think that was the case. I think what was required is what I did as well, which I literally got the police commissioner in and said, you have to deal with this and your job's on the line. And that's what should happen today. That's if we want to deal with it. See, this is where I go back to the hypocrisy. At the time, so many people in the community, particularly left-wingers, said, I'll start again. So many people in the community, left-wingers, rallied to the defence of criminals. I mean, it's just preposterous. We had people literally fighting the good fight for people who manufacture drugs and distribute them and cause this misery in our community. So this is why I'm saying, this is what I'm saying about it. It's like, do we believe in a prohibition of drugs or not? If we believe in a prohibition of drugs, one way you can go is to take firm, decisive action. The police know who they are. They know where they are. They have all the intelligence. Why aren't they dealing with them? And that way, and you can deal with them. We show that.
Would the police blame the courts for lack of prospect of successful conviction?
We could come back to that in a sec. The other way we can go is we can say, listen, prohibition doesn't work. We've actually created the business model by having prohibition. If you think about that for a sec, the reason they have a business model is because we have a zero tolerance for drugs policy. So instead of people being able to buy safe, legal drugs, I know people sort of recoiling at that, but instead of that, people are buying. Anyone who wants to buy drugs is out there buying them now, and those drugs are being made in backyards and industrial precincts and by people who never passed high school. So yeah. I guess I'm just putting these are the left and right of the situation in terms of how you can approach these things. Yeah. So let's stop being hypocrites and actually say what we want to do here. On the issue of the courts, well, here in Queensland, the Labor Party have been in charge from 1989 through to 2022, all but about 5 years they've been in charge. They've appointed the judges, the magistrates, they've created most of the laws, they've created the system. They stand accountable.
Yep.
They stand accountable, and if the system's not performing.
Yeah. Let's talk about another issue that a lot of people are going to be put off the Lib Dems by, a lot of my viewers, which is a segment necessarily not reflective of the broader population, but that's abortion. It is a federal issue because Tanya Plibersek made it a federal campaign issue at the last federal election, and thank goodness she lost, and her policies didn't get up along with Bill Shorten. But she wanted it to be cheaper and more abortion clinics built, and to spread the service, make it easier for women in regional and outback communities. Of course, it's the Labor Party that deprives maternity services, all of them, including ultrasounds and other things, I can't remember the right word, but the pre-maternity services from those areas. And this is essentially something that goes with it. But abortion, the classic libertarian ip is the argument of bodily autonomy. You get to do what you want with your body. But I guess I want to put to you two things that I think libertarians should be authentic libertarians should be concerned about. One is the fact that there is a new Australian from the moment of fertilisation, from the moment of conception. There biologically, indisputably, is a new living human there that deserves the same consideration as every other citizen under a libertarian government, that we're there to protect that person's rights. And secondly, that even if I lose that point, my money shouldn't be taken as a taxpayer to subsidise that which violates my conscience.
Okay. Well, there's two important points. I guess why don't I just simply state my position?
Well, let's take your personal position.
Yeah. Well, my position is this: is that women should be able to get an abortion, but for example, the laws that were brought in here in Queensland by Pellowe and Trad a few years ago are just absolute anathema to me. Late term abortion is hideous, and the point that you were making is well made. That first point, in that there's actually two people involved here.
Yeah.
It's not just the woman, it's not the mother, it's the unborn child, and so there's 9 months of the progression of the fetus. There is a point, I believe, where we've gone too far. Now, I'm not professing to be an expert there. I'll just say that where we are now is hideous.
Yeah. And
it's wrong. And
just a little interjection for those people watching at home. I'm not going to debate this issue. The purpose of this interview isn't to change Campbell's mind. It's actually just to pose the position and let him explain his position to you. So
yeah. So I believe that they're hideous laws, and I just reflect on how awful it was to see people in the Parliament then cheering and applauding, and
right.
That was repugnant as well. So yeah, I think then we've talked about George Christensen. One of the things that George has made is he's made a number of important points about this as well.
The Born Alive Children Protection Act.
Exactly, yeah. And
you would have supported that bill?
Yeah, I think I would have actually. And I would say as well to you that I make this important point. to really underline how I feel.
That's really important.
Yeah.
For us choosing a federal senator to know that if George's bill had got to the Senate, you would have been behind it.
I believe, from what I've heard about it, I'm going to be upfront here. I haven't seen
the essence of it is that a child born alive, once outside the womb, no matter how they got there, if it was the result of natural consequences or a abortion procedure, that child should be treated the same regardless. You're now outside the mother's body, you get all the primary care that any other child would.
That's the way I understood
if
it.
it's medically indicated.
Yeah, that's the way I understood it. And just amplifying this thing, I find it just amazing that our society on one hand is so busy doing everything we can to save preemie babies, right? But so there's babies who are wanted and loved. We're doing everything we can, putting huge resources into saving children who once upon a time would have died. However, over here, where we've got another situation where we say it's okay to abort children at about the same stage of development, and that's particularly for me the reason why this is so bad. In terms of the cost of the funding of that, well, I guess that's a bit more problematic for me. I probably believe that. Ultimately, yes, the system should be paying, and if you say that's wrong, well, there are many cases of where money is spent on things that in the world of medical procedures where I would question whether we should be paying for now anyway. For example, but I know as a fact that people in the ADF are getting sort of.
Correct, that shouldn't be subsidised, gender reassignment surgery.
Yeah, and all this sort of stuff. So why is that under the system? So, but I think early term abortions for the right reasons.
Let me put it to you as a moral equivalency. Tax, and I think this is a strong chink to attack in the libertarian, a strong inconsistency in libertarian thinking to attack. If you want to be libertarian, surely we must believe in the taxpayer's right, moral right, to not subsidise that which violates his own conscience. So as a moral equivalence, I would say treating an unborn child as a piece of property instead of as a person is equivalent to slavery. And to ask me to then subsidise that is morally equivalent to asking me to give a business owner a tax deduction for the purchase of a slave.
But I don't know where I guess this is where do you draw the line though, David? It's like there are so many things in our society today that I have to, I'm on a good wicket, so I pay relatively high rates of tax, and I'm paying for all sorts of things that I can't abide. Whether it be the funding of, in this state of this state government gives money to radical environmental groups who adopt an agenda that is against what I believe is the interests of the whole community. You mentioned gender assignment in the military.
Your point is well made.
That's
the
condition of being. That's the condition.
My answer to your question or to your response is that the fact that we're not able maybe to definitively define the line ultimately isn't really an excuse on not moving the line. And I think we can move the line beyond a lot of these things. No, taxpayers shouldn't be subsidising gender reassignment surgery for anybody. And no, taxpayers shouldn't be subsidising the deliberate taking of another living person's life in an abortion clinic. If you want that and somehow the laws permit that, well, that's fine, but surely the line should stop at asking me to pay for you to have that. That very morally, at the very least, can we all concede that's morally debatable and therefore not fair to ask anybody to subsidise.
I'm prepared to think about your point. I probably today, to be again upfront about it, say that I'm not there, but I do have to again insist that we could, if with a bit of time, we could come up with 100 examples of things that that you or I don't agree with that we're paying for right now as taxpayers.
Well, let's make it Lib Dem policy to stop subsidising the 100 things.
Well, that's something we want to do anyway, because if I could just get this in, that's why we want lower taxes, and we want less sort of subsidy to families and the like. We want people to get their tax.
I want to come to the non-controversial ones,
yeah.
the really good policies that I endorse and will be supporting Lib Dem candidates for. That's not a bias, that's the result of this election examining the alternatives. I guess just to draw a line under the abortion issue, where is the line for you where you say, okay, we'll let you do that even if I don't like it, and no, you can't? Where's the line for you? Is it medical viability or some other point? Because you're against late-term abortion and you're for early-term. So are you first trimester, second trimester, or as the line of science moves, you'll move with that?
David, I think it's about a viable human being, but I think it's got to be well before that. And I do have a real problem with people, going well into their pregnancy, and then making a decision like this. And
the definition of viability is more than 50% chance of surviving outside the womb.
Yeah, David, I don't know enough about the details of this particular aspect to it. I just simply say to you that if a child that is in the womb, that is well and truly on the way to being viable, is being aborted, that's terrible. I really do. But in the first week since conception, well, I don't have a problem with that. The first month, I don't have a problem with that. But that's when a woman who doesn't want to have that child should be making the decisions. And I think that's really important. Now, I get told by people that there are good reasons for not. When I know only too well about what's entailed in aborting a late-term child, it's hideous. Again, I just want your viewers to understand that. But where you draw the line, well, it's not where it is here in Queensland today. That's probably the best way I can answer that.
Yeah. You wouldn't have passed those laws. Cool. Well, there's a lot more to say on that, but we don't have the time for this purpose. Let's talk about the good stuff, or even we'll start with the controversial stuff that I applaud. Freezing or eliminating minimum wages. Is it in your party manifesto?
Yeah.
Explain that to the local blue-collar worker who thinks minimum wages are the backbone of fairness to employment in Australia.
Well, minimum wages mean people don't get employed, and particularly keep a whole lot of young people who want casual work out of the workforce. And it also means higher costs of goods and services for all of us. Deregulation of the labour market is very important to actually get this country going. But what we're saying, though, remember, is that you get lower taxes as well. See, what happens in this country is we entrench minimum sort of provisions like this, but then people start getting taxed almost immediately at relatively high rates.
That's
of
an
tax.
interesting point.
Yeah, so we're saying that you would not pay any tax until you earn $40,000.
Which is effectively a pay rise.
And then only 20 cents in the dollar. Yeah.
Okay, so tax-free threshold going up a whole lot. And then you want to flatten all tax brackets to the one.
So why is that? What does that mean? Well, it means that people have the most incredible incentive to actually work hard for themselves and their families. So it means that you can make that call to do that extra hour of overtime, and you're not going to lose. So, for example, just think, look, there are many blue-collar workers who work in mining and construction who are actually over $180,000 a year, because they're actually quite highly paid jobs, fly-in, fly-out workers and the like. So if they do an hour's overtime at, say, an iron ore mine in the Pilbara or a coal mine in central Queensland, they lose basically 50 cents in the dollar. 50 cents in the dollar. That's a big disincentive. And so under our proposals.
You have to work your first half hour for the government.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the government's proposals at the moment. That's what we do. So Australia's a highly taxed country, and what we're saying is there should be, lower taxes, that people should actually have their money up front and have the ability to decide how they want to spend it.
To save the time in this interview episode for other topics, let me just endorse that policy, because what it actually does is it increases your disposable income, which spreads the cost of living, but it also increases government revenue. There is an economic principle which says that as taxes reduce to a certain point, it increases revenue because people work more and effectively pay more tax because they're just earning more. So this is very, very, very sensible economic policy, and one of the reasons, this was family first policy actually, with a lower tax-free threshold, but a 20% tax bracket for everybody, companies and all individuals, and very, very sensible. But let's move on to another topic, another one of your policies. What's some of your favourite ones?
Well, look, on the issue of superannuation, another one that it talks about.
This is a good one, because Clive's got some thoughts about superannuation here as well. Feel free to mention, contrast and compare.
Well, we're just simply talking about superannuation being voluntary. So basically you can opt out of the current system. So if you want to stay in and have your money taken out and popped into a fund, fine. But if you want your money up front, you get it. Make no mistake.
So does the employer contribution still compulsory?
No, not at all. You can actually opt out. So you get that money. So at the moment, your employer's now taking 10% of what you would have got and chucking it in your fund.
So
you can take that money instead.
Minimum wage, let's say an admin person's making $30 an hour. The employer has to pay them $30 an hour, withhold tax, and pay an extra 10% to a superannuation fund. Just to clarify how this would work in your mind, would the employer now pay them $33 an hour?
Absolutely.
Right, so it's not saving employers' money.
No, it's not saving employers' money, it's giving you your money. It is, look, the point is, David, it is your money now. Right now, if I'm employing you, that is, on that the hypothetical you just said, you're costing me $33 an hour. I'm giving...
When compulsory super was introduced, was it added or taken out of the amount that employers were paying their
what
employees?
happened back in those days, and it started at a lower amount, this is the Hawke Keating era when those first kicked off. Basically, it was a deal with the unions in terms of the bargaining agreements at the time.
Right.
Essentially, it was a pay rise to people, but given through through.
So it was an
part
add-on cost.
Part of it was through some. Well, it was an added cost to the employer. You just never saw it. But it was an economic reform that was designed to actually put more money into savings and things like that.
What percentage of workers nowadays, on average, will live long enough to access their superannuation and enjoy it all?
Well, I'm not across the numbers of
Okay.
that, but
I was teeing you up for a soft one.
Well,
it's 50%.
Well, but
50% of people will never access their super.
Well, I'm surprised a bit about that, but the problem as well with what's going on is this was meant to actually save, the federal government money. But the ridiculous thing is that people will have this lifetime of contributions into compulsory super. They might accrue, $180,000 to $250,000 worth of money in their fund. Then they retire. They pull that money out. They might pay off some bills or pay off the mortgage or whatever. But then what happens is they then still have to survive. It's not enough, there wasn't enough money to actually retire on, so they're on the pension anyway. So what we're saying is, you should be trusted to get your money up front if you want it, and you can do what you want with your money throughout the course of your working life. And people have many different sort of aspirations and goals in their lives. So that's a big one in terms of the Lib Dems philosophy.
All right. Dare I ask you for any weaknesses in the Lib Dem? Any reasons why people you think might not want to consider them?
I can't think of any at all.
well answered.
I think you've already really pushed me hard on, say, some of those social policy issues.
Yeah.
I mean.
Well, I guess I'm asking you to criticise your own party, which you probably no good campaigner is ever going to volunteer on camera.
But I think you've highlighted where some people who are, conservative but not libertarian will have some concerns, and that's fine. But it's like, my pitch back to you though is, this is honesty. We've had an honest conversation about these things, but you can. There are most of the politicians out there and the parties out there are telling you exactly what's been focus grouped and nuancing things so that they don't get into the situation where they are telling the truth. So we're putting it out there. We're putting things on the table that.
I think it's good strategy, honestly, because it's the best chance of winning those undecided.
And I'll put it a bit differently. It's like this. One's got to be true to oneself. It's like, this is how I feel about various issues. That's why I joined the Lib Dems. If people choose not to vote for me and I'm not in, well, I guess that's fine. I mean, I can cope with that, rather than pretending to be something I'm not.
That's all we want.
And getting elected. Yeah, it's like, I hope people will support me, because actually another thing I should say about politicians and parties in general is, politics is about compromise, and just dogmatic. This is just a position we can't move from. That means actually you don't get anywhere. There does have to be some give and take. So when people are watching this interview today, I'd say to them, well, look, you might like A, B and C and hate D and E. My pitch is to say, well, you can still support me, and we'll have to agree to disagree on D and E, because I'm still going to be the better advocate for you overall.
And again, the reason I would agree with that is not out of prejudice or predisposition bias, but it's actually because of my commitment to issues and the best outcome for Australia. And my perspective is that those issues that Christians, conservative like me, who have those points of difference with you, I think we can acknowledge that those issues are not the ones being contested that we need a champion for right now. And if those issues come up at the next election or the election after, and there's somebody seeking heinous legislation and we need a strong champion, then you might not be the guy then. But right now the issue is freedom and small government and government overreach. And I think Liberal Democrats are offering credible, competent champions in the space on the issues that we need to battle at this election and this time in history. And
that's an interesting way of putting it.
I will always be an undecided voter and look for the man for the hour.
Well, that's interesting perspective. And the other thing I'd say is that on some of these social policy issues that are controversial, it's like this: I'm not riding on that white horse on my charger, going to vying for the Senate because I want to actually get change on those issues.
No.
Like, my position on drugs is not going to be supported by people for many, many years. I think in time we will have to wake up and go that way. So there is absolutely no point, and there will be no effort on my part of expending energy on issues like that. Where will I put my energy? I'll put them into the things we've talked about: tax and superannuation and smaller government. I will be putting my energies into standing against this odious digital identity legislation and other sort of intrusive legislation that seeks to spy on Australians and take away their rights. Those are the things that are important to me right now, David.
Final question, because we're out of time. Two-part question. What is the consequence, if successful, of forcing banks to fix home loans no higher than 3%?
Yes.
And second part, what is the consequence, if possible, of forcing all superannuation companies to divest their foreign investments and invest only in Australia?
Well, probably deal with the latter one first. I think that the idea of making superannuation funds invest only in Australia is on the surface of it quite compelling and quite interesting, because we do have a need for capital to be invested in this country. However, from a risk perspective of looking after the interests of the actual people whose retirements are meant to be funded, you actually have to go further. That would be, yes, it might be good for Australia, but that money isn't for the country of Australia. That is the money for all these Australians who've put their savings, albeit unwillingly, as we've sort of said, into this fund. And so the people running a superannuation fund have a solemn duty to make sure they invest in a way that ensures those Australians get the best outcome for their dollars. So, to just say we're only going to invest in Australia would actually be risky. I know that might not seem necessarily the case, but it would be actually riskier than a strategy that said we're going to invest globally in appropriate companies and organisations that ultimately will give the best possible return. I mean, for example, if you want to be able to pay for people's pensions and retirement savings, why wouldn't you look at, for example, high growth economies? There are places like let's take Indonesia. Indonesia has high growth, which means investment by Australian superannuation funds in the right sort of Indonesian companies could give better retirement incomes to Australians in their retirement. Whereas if you just stick to Australia, you might not be able to effectively provide for those incomes. So I don't think it's a good idea.
Which creates a subsequent burden on the taxpayer to provide for them in the absence of the funds they could have got from foreign investment.
Yeah, but and by the way though, I think there are changes that should be made to the way superannuation funds are measured and regulated, which would probably see more money coming into Australia and also coming into early stage companies which are short of capital. I think that there's certainly some arguments there at things you could do to get better investment in Australia, but a ban, if you like, or a compulsion to spend it all here, that's going too far. Probably that's the way to finish that. In terms of this thing on 3% interest rates, that's diabolically dangerous, and here's the reason why. Banks actually source a lot of the money they lend to us for our homes from overseas. And the market is the market. It's not just what Australia says the interest rate's going to be. I mean, right now, for example, there's a lot made of Anthony Albanese not knowing the official cash rate, which was 0.1%, still is. Well, that ain't the base borrowing rate for people in business. It was about 150, 180 days ago, but I can tell your viewers it's now about, I think when I last checked, about 40 points, so 0.4%. It's gone up quite a bit. So people in business like me, we're paying those higher interest rates right now, and that's the market working. That's the international finance market working, the Australian financial markets working. So the effect of trying to peg interest rates for home loans at 3% means things like simply there won't be as much money around for home loans, so they'll be rationed. People will have much stringent requirements for borrowing for those home loans, and it simply is a complete distortion of the market. It'll actually hurt people who want to buy their first home or refinance their home. So I think it's a bad idea. And by the way, 3%, gee whiz, only 2 to 3 years ago, we were paying, 3.8, 4.5 in that range. It was much higher. So 3% is unnaturally low as well. I just make that point. So it's a nice one to promise, but very unrealistic and will hurt people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time, your honesty, and straightforwardness.
Thanks, mate.
You can guess who he's voting for. But it's only one vote, the same as anyone else's. When counting starts, it's soon obvious that there's a big swing against the government. The people have voted in one of the closest elections in Australia's history.